גבוה לי לך מבשרת ציון הרימי והכוח קולך מבשרת ירושלים.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming to Derech Hashem. Today's class is sponsored by the Miaskovsky family in memory of Tzudik ben Leib, and Anatoly Rabbe. His neshama should have an aliyah, and thank you to Gedalia Miaskovsky and family for sponsoring. Today we're talking about prophecy once again. We're in the middle of the Ramchal section. His whole entire third section of Derech Hashem is about prophecy. And today we're going to discuss the difference between the prophecy of all prophets and that of Moshe Rabbeinu. The prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu is considered on a special level, different from all the other prophets, and we're going to be talking about that today. In fact, this is such a major topic that the Rambam in his 13 Principles of Faith that every believing Jew has to believe, has to subscribe to. One is not considered part of the Jewish people if he does not subscribe to these 13 beliefs. Number 7 is the belief that the prophecy of Moshe was inherently different than the prophecy of all other prophets. That means the way that Moshe spoke to God was different than the way that God spoke to every other prophet. The way he spoke to Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov was different than the way he spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu, to Moses. And this is tied to the fact that it was through Moshe that the Torah was written. The Torah was written by the word of Hashem. God literally told Moshe what words to write down in the Torah, and Moshe did so. And we're going to see that has to do with the type of prophecy that Moshe had versus that of the prophets that came before and after him. So in the Naaman edition, we're on page 451. And if you're following along, we're in Chelek Gimel, section 3, Parak Dalet, Parak Hey. So section 3, chapter 5. V'havdo kol hanavim and Moshe Rabbeinu olav hashalom. The difference between all of the prophets and Moses. Hine, madregos hanavua al derech klal yischalku l'shtayim. There are two levels of prophecy in general. You can divide up all prophets into two levels. Ha'achas, madregos kol hanavim chutz me Moshe Rabbeinu olav hashalom. V'hashniya, madregos Moshe Rabbeinu olav hashalom. One group of prophets, one level of prophecy, is all of the prophets except for Moses. And the second level of prophecy is the prophecy of Moses. So the prophecy of Moshe is so unique that it has its own category. It's Moshe on one side and everybody else on the other. And who made this distinction? Who made these two groups of prophets? Hashem himself made this distinction. Uber Havdalim, because it says in the Torah, to the prophets I will make it known through a vision. Lo kain avdi Moshe. That is not so how I speak to my servant Moshe. So all of the other prophets will see Hashem speaks to them through visions and things like that, but that is not the case when it comes to Moshe. Beis. Klal kol navim chutz Moshe. The general rule when it comes to all of the prophets besides Moses, nevuasam al yedei mara o chalom. The prophecy they receive is through a vision or a dream. U'kemoshe kasav, like the verse says, b'mara elav esvada, through a vision I will be known to them. B'chalom adaber bo, through a dream I will speak to them. V'hainu she'kadosh baruch hu mishtamish min hachalom hachaku kfar b'tivam shabnei adam lios lahem le'emtzai lahamshich al yado hanavu l'navi. There is something in creation called a dream. So Hashem uses, as we discussed in previous weeks, Hashem uses this thing that's called a dream to communicate messages to his prophets. This type of thing, to give them messages. Now that doesn't mean to say that a dream and a prophecy is the same thing. But rather, a dream is something proper to in front of Hashem to convey this message. That it should be the means of conveying a message to the prophet. So as we learned before, that when a prophet would receive a message from Hashem, we talked about the prophet schools and how someone had to study for a long time to become a prophet, to know how to get himself on that high spiritual level, to receive messages from God. And when we mentioned that when a prophet would receive a message, all of his bodily functions would cease. He would go outside of his senses, his physical body would become weak, and Hashem would give him messages, and Hashem would insert ideas into his imaginary faculty. Now, so that Hashem uses the dreams and the imagination as a means of conveying the messages. Now, it says in the Gemara in Brachos that a dream is 1/60th of prophecy. So what does that mean? It only means that so he says that prophecy, that dreams being 1/60th of prophecy, all that means is that a dream is a way that a person can receive messages outside of the normal physical means, just like prophecy is a way for a person to receive messages outside of the physical means. Now, we learned many weeks ago that a person can get messages in dreams, certain ideas conveyed from the upper spheres, but we said the problem is that we don't know when our dreams are coming from an authentic source, because dreams could also be just from what a person ate or what he did during his day that can influence his dreams, or they could be from the kochos atomo. We talked about how there are these evil spiritual forces in the world, and a person could be receiving messages from this evil spiritual force that is telling him things which are false. So even though a person will receive messages, authentic messages in his dreams, by the time it gets to us, it's so convoluted and it's so we don't know where it's coming from, they really can't be trusted the majority of the time. Okay, Gimel. V'hine, behiskaber shefa hanavu al hanavi. Now, when the shefa of the prophecy goes on to the prophet, Hashem's shefa, say, he goes out from his senses and his feelings, and it's like he's in a sleep. He's in a trance-like state. And his mind is like the mind of someone who is sleeping or dreaming. And through that he gets the nevuah that we said Hashem puts ideas into his head. And again, it's not a literal dream. He's just in a dream-like state. The difference when we have dreams and a prophet has dreams, we're just having dreams that could be nonsense. But a prophet, Hashem would literally put the ideas in his head, and the prophet would know. He was trained to know when he was getting those dreams, and it came through, we said it came through a direct closeness, a super close relationship that the prophet had with God. Now, it could happen that a prophet gets these messages when he's awake, like we mentioned, meaning that he'd be awake, and all of a sudden he would go into a trance. Right? You see it says by Avraham, that Avraham, it says deep sleep came over him, and then he would get a prophecy, so it could be during the day, but before he would get the prophecy, it wasn't while he was awake. He could have been awake, but then he would have been going into a trance-like state, and Hashem giving him these messages. Or it could be that he got these prophecies at night, when he's on his bed, when he's dreaming at night. Nevertheless, but he would only, the point is, whatever it is, whether he got the prophecy during the day or at the night, he would, when he or she got the prophecy, they would be outside of their regular physical senses. And they would be in this totally in this trance-like state. But it could happen very quickly in a short amount of time. You could get a prophecy in a short amount of time. It doesn't have to be, over several hours. It could have been a few moments. The Yashav take and then he goes right back to his original state. However, even though it's a short time, the moment when he's actually when he or she is receiving the prophecy, they are in this trance-like state until they receive the prophecy. Okay. Any questions thus far? Any good? Okay. Dalet. V'amnam. Riyasam shalanaviyim eina ela kamisharo ba'aspaklaria shebo roen es hanaisim hamitztarim ach einam romen kamisharo es chaveru lefanav. Now, how does a prophet see these images? Because a prophet doesn't see these images and ideas coming from God like one would see their friend, but rather he sees it through what is compared to mirrors. Let's see, he's going to explain this. What does it mean? V'lo kamisharo ba'aspaklaria achas. Not like someone who sees through one mirror, ela kamisharo metocha aspaklarios rabos, but like someone who sees something through many mirrors. Right? You ever see something that's reflected through many mirrors? There are medium, and the mirror is serving as a medium to see the object. One is not glancing at the object directly, but rather, let's say, one could say it's being filtered or it's being transferred through these mirrors. Shenetek behem atzir mizulazu, that the image goes from one mirror to another mirror. Achanirahu echad vade, but for sure he knows what he's seeing. Utunosav, and and its movements can be seen through the mirror. Niras metochas baklarios. Afal pi she'ein mabitim elav ba'orach mishur. Even though the prophet isn't looking at the object straight, he can see what he's looking at, and he knows the message that he's perceiving. He's just seeing it through these mirrors, these aspaklarios. V'lo od, furthermore, ela she'ein riyasim ela k'mi she'roa metoch aspaklaria bilti mitzuchtzeches she'afshar lo liros hanosiv be'er gomer. And he's also, these mirrors aren't totally clear. He's not looking at Hashem through, not Hashem, but these messages through a totally clear object, through total clarity. Through total clarity. So in addition to the multiple mirrors and reflection, as he says here, by name, and it loses some of its sharpness by being reflected. So too, it's impossible for the prophet to see the literal glory of Hashem with clarity. Even though what they're seeing is the true glory of Hashem, and there's no doubt about it. We said when a prophet receives a prophecy, like we mentioned, and he's an expert prophet, he knows for sure that he is receiving a prophecy. It's clear to him that he's receiving true messages from God. And each prophet has a different level which he sees. There are certain prophets that saw a more clear vision of through these mirrors than another prophet. And they could see it more clearly. But nevertheless, even though we said there are all these mirrors, and some of it could be unclear, and it sounds like the greater the prophet, the more clear the mirrors would be, nevertheless, the prophet definitely saw a true image. He knows that the vision he's getting is from God. And he also understands the medium. He understands the mirrors. He understands that he's seeing this vision through these mirrors. Mitziyoso, Visodo, he knows the secret of it and the reality of it. Umaskil ha'askala hanishpaoslo. Be'emes u'be'erer. And he sees the truth of it. And like we mentioned in the third parak, like we mentioned in the third chapter, that anyone who sees any prophet, any expert prophet, knows totally when he is getting a vision from Hashem. We're just adding that the way the prophet sees the vision is through multiple mirrors, multiple reflections, and also these reflections can lose their sharpness. And depending on the level of the prophet, that will either increase or decrease the sharpness and the nature of these mirrors that he is seeing the prophecy. But the prophet does not look directly at the glory of Hashem. And so, just like the glory of Hashem is reaching the prophet through these mirrors, so too the ideas which are getting to him, the ideas that Hashem is delivering to the prophet. That when a prophet receives a message, they're through parables and stories and riddles. And like a person would dream, like we talked about above. So that's all about the regular prophets. So one thing he mentioned is that a regular prophet will receive his prophecy in a trance-like state, and number two, he sees it through many mirrors, many reflections, and not looking directly at the honor of Hashem. And just like he's not looking directly at the honor of Hashem, he doesn't get the messages directly, but rather he gets them through, he or she gets them through parables. But nevertheless, even though there is this barrier between the prophet and Hashem, nevertheless the prophet knows what he is receiving is an authentic message of God, an authentic prophecy, and we talked about how prophets would study for a long time to know that the prophecy was authentic and that they weren't getting messages from the Kochos HaTumah or things like that. But nevertheless, that is how the prophecy was delivered. Now let's see what he says about the prophecy of Moses. The prophecy of Moshe is on a level completely higher than all of this. First, when Moshe received prophecy, he did not need to go out of his senses at all. He did not need to be in a dreamlike state. He received this prophecy when he was awake, just like his normal functioning. So other prophets, they received their prophecy, they had to go into this dreamlike, trance-like state where all of their senses were totally overwhelmed. When Moshe spoke to God, he spoke to God just in his normal state. This is what it says about him. Pel pel daberbo. Speak to him face to face, mouth to mouth, face to face. And he was looking at Hashem like he was looking. It was like there was only one mirror, one lens between them. And this one lens was very clear. So while the other prophets had multiple lenses, multiple mirrors, and they weren't so clear, Moshe Rabbeinu had one, and it was very clear. And also, the ideas which reached Moshe were totally clear. They weren't through riddles. It says, I showed him and not in riddles. But even to Moshe, he didn't look directly at the glory of Hashem. He only received the glory of Hashem to the level that a human being would be able to do so. Like to someone, like an image that was formed in a vision. So, because besides that, seeing the glory of Hashem not within a vision, but a human being cannot look directly at the glory of Hashem. That's why we have Moshe, the Medrash, Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to see the glory of Hashem, and he saw, quote unquote, his back, whatever that was, but he couldn't see directly. Even Moshe, the holiest person that ever lived, couldn't see God directly. He only saw, he had a higher level of perception, and a qualitatively was on a different level, but it was still not a super direct looking at Hashem. It was through a vision. But that what he could see was totally clear. It's like someone looking through a clear lens, totally clear, and there's nothing blocking his vision. And it says this, and he perceived the picture of Hashem. He also had this picture, quote unquote, it was very clear, very good. That none of the other prophets had. The other prophets, even the one they couldn't. The other prophets couldn't perceive it so clear. Through this image that he could perceive, Moshe, he got a lot of very lofty ideas with extreme clarity. And more than all of the prophets, like we mentioned. Obviously, it doesn't mean literally a picture of Hashem, because Hashem has no image. Hashem doesn't have a body or anything. But the perception that Moshe had of God was on a qualitatively different level than all of the other prophets. It was through one lens of a mirror, and it was extremely clear. And even that, though, Moshe didn't glance, speaking in metaphors here, he didn't glance directly at God, because no human being could do that. Again, we're speaking in metaphors. There's no literal body of God that someone could look at, chas v'shalom. Okay, Vav. I know it's a little longer tonight, but it's a shorter parak, and I think we can do it all in one night. Okay, Vav. Od hevdel haya ben shar neviim Moshe. There's another difference between all the prophets and Moshe. Sheshar neviim lo haya biyadam lehinave b'chol shah. El b'shah shehaya bari yizbarach shmarot. So all the other prophets, they could only speak to Hashem when Hashem wanted to speak to them. Haya mashra shifa aleim u'misnavdim. Hashem would bestow his shefa on the prophets, his holiness on the prophets, and then he would send them messages whenever God wanted. But the prophets couldn't say, God, I would like to speak to you now. They couldn't do that. Ach Moshe Rabbeinu al Vashalom, but Moshe, Hayadavar Tali B'Ritzono, it was whenever he wanted. Moshe was able to speak to God whenever he wanted. Can you imagine? You have a hotline to Hashem. Literally, I mean, we all have a hotline to Hashem. We could daven, but Hashem would speak back directly, and he could hear him. And right. So even all the other prophets didn't have that. So we're reading about Abraham, right? Abraham, one of the holiest Jews that ever lived. Even he wasn't at this level. Only Moshe had the ability to speak to God whenever he wanted. And when he spoke to God, it was like face to face. Furthermore, the other prophets could only understand certain details. Whatever details God wanted to give to the prophets, that's what they understood. Moshe merited to receive all of the secrets of creation. Everything about creation, the whole order of creation. And he was given permission to research in all of this and to delve into it and to inquire about it all. And he was given all of the keys that no other human being was ever given. V'hu masha amar akasim, this is what the verse says, B'chol beisi neman, who in all of my house he is the trustworthy one. V'chein nemar, it says, Ani avir kol tuvi al panecha, I will put all of my goodness upon him. I'll show you all my goodness. V'hine hanavim kulam k'mo shehayim asigim atzir shehayim mitztar lehem min hakavod k'mo shezacharnu v'ayim asigim tzor atzir v'nyanu perish sod himatzi zeh inyan shia kavod mitztar ve'ech nimshach zeh u'ma kavana b'chol zeh v'chein hayim asigim haskal amitis b'sod ha'gedolos yisbarach al yedei atzir hahu kein hayim asigim amitis hadavar shebo yisbarach be'emes ein shum tzir klal v'she'ein atzir hahu el davar nase le'enei hanavi kirtzona yisbarach atam yedua etzlo. He says that by all of the other prophets, that they would grasp the glory of Hashem, and they would understand the image and the content of what Hashem was showing them. Meaning, we said that the prophets could understand the mirrors and the means of the way they received their prophecy. Meaning the secret of how Hashem was showing His glory and what His intent was. And they would be based on that. They would understand true intellect. So that also, meaning just like they would understand the means of the prophecy, they would understand the truth of the image and the messages that they were getting. And on this it says to the Jewish people, Utmuna eincham roim zulasi kol. One second. Right, they understood the idea that Hashem does not have an image, what we mentioned before, that God does not have an image, and this is what it says, that it says in Devarim, and an image you didn't see, you saw the voice. V'chein, it says, Ki lo re'isim kol tmuna, you didn't see any image. Ki hinei shnei Devarim hisigu be'emes, two things prophecy they received. The prophets understood that the true essence of God, there's no image at all. And he's totally foreign to anything the mind could think and anything resembling this. Right? Those verses that we just read, those psukim, we're talking about when the Jewish people heard the giving of the Torah, that they didn't see any image of God, because God doesn't have an image, and He's totally separate from that. After this knowledge, they received images of the prophetic pictures. That it says, Vayiru es Elokei Yisrael. You saw Hashem. This is what the rabbis say when they say it was an image of speech. They didn't see literally God. Rather, they saw images that were perceived through the speech. And that is like the image that was made in the mirrors. He's saying that the prophets, and it sounds like he's also talking about when the Jewish people at Mount Sinai, none of them actually saw an image of God. There's no such thing as seeing an image of God. What they did see was images of the prophecy that was portrayed through speech. I think it has to do with, it says Amara es hakolos, that they saw the voices, they saw the voice of Hashem, quote unquote, whatever that means. There were certain images that were produced, certain visions that were produced from the speech, but it is not literally a image of God, because such a thing does not exist. Okay. And with that, we finished the third section of Derech Hashem, which is very exciting. So we're 3/4 of the way done with the Sefer, and I'm very excited about next week, because we're starting the fourth section. The fourth section is very exciting because it goes through all of the mitzvos. It talks about learning, davening, brachos, all of the mitzvahs through the year, Sukkah, Lulav, Rosh Hashanah, and it talks about the meaning of each mitzvah. And it makes one's mitzvah observance and one's Torah learning much more meaningful when we understand the depths of all this. If anyone has any questions about what we learned today, at the end it got a little more esoteric, please feel free to call me, message me, and we can learn it together, maybe clarify a bit more. Wishing everyone a good week, and thanks again to the Miaskovsky family for sponsoring for Tzudik ben Leib.